What could potentially be holding up a contract extension between Christian Benford and the Buffalo Bills? We're breaking that down for you and more today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate you all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Well, folks, welcome in. It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control our conversation. And we're going to spend a lot of time here in the opening segment breaking down some of the dynamics that could be in play as it relates to a contract extension with Christian Benford and the Buffalo Bills. Then we'll get into some more conversation on Michael Hoecht and Larry Ogunjobi, and then some draft talk to kind of close things out in segment 3. And as you can probably tell from listening to me right now, my voice is a little hoarse, dealing with some allergy stuff here as spring is springing here in North Carolina. All right, let's get into it. First one comes from Dan Kadar's Clock, who says, is there a possibility that the Bills are slow rolling the Benford signing to validate his health after the 2 concussions? Guessing his new contract will have a lot of guaranteed money, which could be a problem if concussions are an issue. So let's talk about the factors in play as it relates to Christian Benford and this contract extension, because the Bills have been getting some extensions done. Of course, Josh Allen, Khalil Shakir, Terrell Bernard, Greg Rousseau, and Christian Benford, of course, high on the list of players you'd think the Bills would want to get back. And this certainly feels like a timely conversation after Derek Stingley got a massive contract extension from the Houston Texans. Star cornerback in the league signs a 3-year, $90 million extension. Now, that is 3 years and $90 million of new money. This is going to also include, for Derek Stingley, his 4th season, his 5th-year option, and then this new money. So you can kind of look at that as $30 million a season, but I think it's probably more fair to lump that together with all of those other remaining deals on the contract, or remaining years on the contract. J.C. Horn signed a 4-year, $100 million deal with the Carolina Panthers. That's $25 million a season. And Patrick Surtain, the defensive player of the year, the reigning defensive player of the year, signed for $24 million a season, and so now suddenly he's underpaid. And so you're wondering where Christian Benford falls into all of this. And let me remind you that Christian Benford has been an elite NFL corner for the last 2 seasons. Comfortably a top 5 corner in each of the last 2 seasons. Checks all the boxes. He can play man coverage. He can play zone. He's got ball skills. He tackles exceptionally well. He's young. He's 24, turns 25 in September. He's built the resume here that is going to pay him a ton of money. Let's go back to 2023. 9 of 16 games, under 25 yards allowed in coverage. He allowed 2 or fewer catches in 10 of 16 games. He allowed more than 50 yards in only 3 of 16 games. Then in 2024, 12 of 18 games, under 25 yards allowed. He allowed more than 50 yards in 3 of 18 games. He allowed 2 or fewer catches in 12 of 18 games. He had the lowest yards per coverage snap of any corner in the NFL last year. 1 reception allowed per 15.8 coverage snaps. 4th best in the NFL. And he's missed 3 combined tackles over the last 2 seasons. So if you're wondering why I'm invoking names like Patrick Surtain and Derek Stingley to discuss a contract extension for Christian Benford, that's the type of player Christian Benford's proven he is. And I don't really think that the holdup is related to concussions or injuries. It's probably a factor that the Bills are being mindful of and maybe using it as some leverage. But I mostly wonder if there is a gap between what Benford is looking for and what the Bills are offering. Every player has different priorities, and the Bills were able to get extensions done early with Terrell Bernard, Khalil Shakir. You think about Greg Rousseau, Matt Milano was an early extension. And those are players that have come out and said they're not really interested in playing anywhere else. They wanted to make it work in Buffalo, and they made it work. And I think in a lot of those situations, those deals come in team friendly. And I think a lot about Spencer Brown last year. Spencer Brown got his deal done early at $18 million a season. And Dan Moore, who has been average to below average for the Steelers, just got $20.5 million a season 7 months later by the Tennessee Titans. And so while we look at the situation and say, yeah, look, it would behoove the Bills to get this done as quickly as possible because the market's going up and you would think the price tag for Benford only goes up. Well, Benford knows that too. He's got to agree to the deal. And I think Spencer Brown left a lot of money on the table. If he would have waited until after 2024 and had the season that he did, Spencer Brown would probably be $23, $24, $25 million a season. And Christian Benford can look at that situation and say, well, yeah, I'm going to bet on myself. I'm going to play out this year, continue to validate who I am. And he's going to have one heck of a case to get the bag. And so I think there's probably a bit of a gap between where the Bills are offering and what Christian Benford wants. And so we'll see how it settles out. I'll remind you of the quote that Brandon Beane had on Friday of last week when discussing the negotiations. He said, quote, "We've been able to get some extensions done. At the end of the day, we love Christian. I don't really get into negotiations. Love Christian. Excited he will be back this season, and we'll see if it works out now, later, or down the road to keep him here. You know what I've always said. We want to draft, develop, and re-sign our own. Excited he'll be here this year, especially since we're thin at the position right now." So you certainly get some mixed messages there, but I mostly think about what he said. We want to draft, develop, and re-sign our own. And certainly Christian Benford's the poster boy for that. And he's acknowledging that they're thin at the position. This is your best young player at the position that you have developed into an upper echelon corner. So I think the desire is going to be to keep him here, but they got to agree on the money. And if they can't, well, he can play out this season and the Bills can franchise tag him. Overthecap.com projects the 2026 franchise tag for a corner to be $22.1 million. That'd be worth it. Now, the problem is that's a hard number against your cap. You don't have the ability to reduce that in any way. Where if you sign him to a deal that paid him $25 million a season, that year one cap hit doesn't have to be quite that significant. So the best thing for the Bills is going to be to get a long-term extension done. But you can certainly understand from Benford's side of things, if his top priority is maximizing the dollars in this next contract, he might want to play out this year and then have an even bigger case for even more money as the cornerback market not only continues to go up, but also the salary cap continues to go up. And this extension for Stingley is big, and we'll see what Sauce Gardner gets. Trent McDuffie's up for a deal. So Benford's probably mindful of all that. And we'll see if the Bills and him can land on a number that makes sense for both parties. But I'm certainly actively rooting for this to get taken care of. All right, folks, we're going to talk about the Michael Hoecht, Larry Ogunjobi stuff a little bit more on the other side of it. Be sure to stick with us. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. I love to pick my favorites. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, And FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. Plus, you can stay in the action. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. Plus, it's easy and fast. FanDuel is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, folks, welcome back. Next one here comes from DK. DK says the Bills, for nearly a decade, have gotten good to elite play out of unathletic replacement-level players at the cornerback position. From E.J. Gaines to Kevin Johnson, Phillip Gaines to Levi Wallace and Dane Jackson, this club has been able to patch together decent corner play from guys. Yet come playoff time seemingly every year, the lack of elite pass rushers allows elite quarterbacks to sit in the pocket and pick our defense apart. I believe McDermott and Bean have noticed this, hence the additions of Bosa, Hoecht, and Ogunjobi. So while Ogunjobi and Hoecht suspensions aren't great, I believe there is a silver lining. This allows Bean to draft more defensive line help early in the draft. With 3 picks in the top 65, I believe Buffalo should use at least 1, but hopefully 2 or 3 picks on defensive linemen. Add a young pass rusher to develop behind a talent like Joey Bosa. Add a young defensive tackle to develop behind Daquan Jones. This way, when playoff time comes around, instead of needing to put out guys like Jordan Phillips, Dwayne Carter, and Austin Johnson for significant snaps, you can have a defensive line that truly goes 8 to 10 deep with Rousseau, Bosa, Epinesa, top 65 rookie, Hoecht, Solomon off the edge, and Oliver Jones, top 65 rookie, Ogunjobi, Carter on the interior. And really have options to attack elite quarterbacks like Mahomes, Burrow, and Jackson. I think it's a good point, and I think the Bills were planning on making some early picks on the defensive line regardless of these suspensions. You know, look at defensive end and Joey Bosa and A.J. Epinesa. They're both expiring contracts. You know, you really only have Solomon and Rousseau signed beyond this year at defensive end. Defensive tackle Daquan Jones and Larry Ogunjobi, expiring contracts, both players on the wrong side of 30, and your only players on a contract beyond this year at defensive tackle, Ed Oliver and Dwayne Carter. So not only do you need players that I think to round out the group to have the depth that you're talking about, but you also need some cost control contributors beyond this season. And so I don't think these suspensions really impact this at all, because I think the Bills were always planning on a couple of early picks for the defensive line. Bills WZA says, how does a player like Michael Hoecht unknowingly get slipped testosterone in his supplements? What incentive would his trainer have to slip him that without Hoecht knowing? I'm just concerned that his story doesn't sound very believable. I would love to hear your thoughts. All right, so I'll do my best here. And I'm only speculating, right? And I'm certainly listening to what Hoecht said, and I'll tell you what I think. There is a lot of money out there in training athletes. It's very competitive for these trainers to get these athletes as clients. The way that they keep them as clients is they get results, right? A result is going to keep a trainer employed. And all these guys are looking for an edge. They're looking for an edge. And so Hoecht said he's worked with this trainer for a while and, you know, has given him supplements in the past. Athletes take a lot of supplements. Trusted trainer says, hey, take this. It's going to get you great results. He takes it, takes them at their word, doesn't correctly vet it out. And the next thing you know, you're suspended for 6 games. I legitimately think that's a very possible story for what happened with Hoecht, and it's kind of what he told us happened. So, like I tried to say on the Monday show, we can't look at these guys like they're Jose Canseco or Mark McGuire. You know, there's different ways that this could happen, and I think that's a pretty straightforward reason as to the situation. Next one here comes from Casey, who says, you touched on it this morning, but with Hoecht and Ogunjobi missing the first 6 weeks, what kind of expectations is it reasonable to have for them? I'm assuming this is better than them coming back from an injury, but they are also away from the team for a decent chunk of time. Curious on your thoughts here. Well, I think it does help that they get a normal offseason. So they get to do all the OTAs, camp, preseason. Then, of course, they have to be away for 4 weeks starting in week 1. but then they do get a 2-week ramp up prior to playing. I think a lot of this is going to depend on where the defense is at. If Dwayne Carter and a draft pick is balling out, it's going to make it tougher for Ogunjobi to get out there and really make an impact. Same thing on the edge. If you like what's going on, got a young draft pick that's working out, maybe Solomon's coming along, might be a little tougher for Hoecht to get his opportunity. But I do think there is a silver lining that guys are going to be more fresh down the stretch. You're going to have a lot of depth. You'll have a well-rested couple of guys, and Hoecht and Ogunjobi coming back. Now, they got to get calloused up, so you probably want to be responsible with how you incorporate them and ramp them up. But we'll see what the rhythm of the defense is at that time. But I think in terms of what you should expect out of those players, the skill sets that I've described to you are still the skill sets. And so it'll be important for them to come in, get up to speed. Obviously, I'm sure they're going to come back with a lot of energy. I'm sure they're not real pleased with how their tenures in Buffalo has started. And I'd expect a highly motivated version of Michael Hoecht and Larry Ogunjobi after suspension to come in and prove that the Bills were right to stay committed to them and, get their seasons going. You only get so many opportunities in the league. So I think that's kind of how you look at the situation. Like I said, nothing about it's ideal, but we'll see where the team's at the time. I mean, they could have an injury, and you could be real happy that these guys are waiting in the wings. So could potentially be some nice reinforcements, but obviously the entire thing complicates their opportunity to make an impact in Buffalo. All right, folks, we got some draft talk to get into here on the other side of it. Be sure to stick with me.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
All right, folks, welcome back. Thanks for bearing with me with the voice today. I mean, allergies, they come on, and you just got to power through, I guess, if you're a podcaster. So let's do it. The next one comes from Justin. Justin says, I often hear about only a certain number of first-round grades. This year, there may only be 22, for example, guys with first-round grades. Can you give more details on how that is determined and how it relates to what the Bills may do at 30? So, yeah, I mean, you got 32 first-round picks, but there's never going to be 32 players that are graded with a first-round evaluation. So every team's going to say, hey, this is my criteria for a guy getting a first-round grade. And they'll assess the players, and usually they'll get between 10 and 20 first-round grades in any given year. Now, teams are going to evaluate players differently. There could be players that the Bills grade in the first round that other teams don't, and vice versa. So you certainly could get a first-round grade at 30, but that's probably unlikely. So it really just depends on how everything plays out. And does that provoke movement? You can talk yourself into going up or down. Like if your first-round grades are going to get cleaned out, move up and go get a guy. Or if your first-round grades are going to get cleaned out, you don't have the warm fuzzies about a player, you can move out like the Bills did last year. So you can leverage picking 30 and not likely having 30 first-round grades to move up or back. If you're sitting there and you're going to have 4 corners to choose from at pick 30 and they're all pretty similar to you, well, you can move back a little bit and say, hey, if we get one of these 4, we're happy. Or if you don't want to mess around and you like them, hey, like not ideally we'd pick this player in the first round, but we want to make sure we get him, then you can stick and pick. So there's a lot of dynamics at play. It's unlikely the Bills will get a first-round grade at pick 30, but it's not impossible because other teams value players differently, right? They really do. So I know that can sometimes be confusing that there's not the same amount of first-round grades as there are selections, but that's the reality. And if you can't move, you got to stick and pick. And just because a player you have graded later is graded later doesn't mean that they can't turn into the type of player that you'd ideally pick in the first round. So a lot at play for the Bills, And with the amount of draft capital they have, I can see a move up, but maybe not necessarily a move up from 30. You could be moving up from pick 106 or something like that to get back into the top 100. So a lot of different possibilities for the Bills in this draft. Michael says, with Sam Martin being cut, are there any round 5 through 7 players worth drafting to be in competition with Jake Camarda? Yeah, I think there's 2 good punters this year, and there might be more, but I'm familiar with 2 of them. James Burnip from Alabama, Jeremy Cranshaw from Florida. I think those are the names that you're looking at when it comes to punters in this coming draft. Last one today, folks, I got to get out of here. I can only say so many more words. Papa T says, if a guard was your last first-round grade on the board, would you draft him at 30? That's a fun question. The answer, though, is no. And I'm assuming this is for the Bills. The draft isn't about collecting talent. The draft is about maximizing the resources that you have to improve your team. And the Bills would not be better enough if they added a first-round guard. They would be better if they improved the position where they need help, like defensive tackle, defensive end, and corner. Now, I'm not saying that you reach for need. Like, there has to be a player that you are feeling is worth the pick. I'm not saying reach for need, but I'm also saying the best way to improve your team is not going to be to pick a guard. And so you have to ask yourself, what is the value? What would make sense? And do whatever it is that would improve your team in the most important way. And so I think that's how the Bills should approach that situation. So you'd hate to pass on a first-round talent, but would a second-round corner or defensive end or defensive tackle that you have graded help your team more than a first-round guard? I think comfortably the second-round defensive tackle, defensive end, or corner would make the Bills a better team than continuing to add a guard where you're in pretty good shape. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us today on this podcast. I'm running out of steam here with the voice. I feel great, just allergies. So hopefully this is better tomorrow. I have a guest lined up for tomorrow, so that'll be nice to have someone to share the mic with so I can kind of get through it in case things are still dicey. All right, as always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.